But some of the problem that we have with singers singing inappropriate repertoire and over-singing is generated by singing teachers in institutions where they have juries and competitions, and they want to show off the singers in their studios, often singing things they shouldn't sing. What do we do about that?
Well, listen, given the climate right now for opera performance, classical music performance, which is what I know, I think there are far too many universities and colleges that are taking money from young people who shouldn't be. I mean, I'm sorry.
Hello, welcome to another episode of American Reconquista. I'm your host, Emilio Pons. Internationally acclaimed soprano Renee Fleming recently made international headlines when, during a conference held under the auspices of the 54th Annual Symposium of the Voice Foundation, she publicly denounced that, and I quote, "Given the climate for opera performance right now, there are far too many universities and colleges that are taking money from young people who shouldn't be." Renee Fleming's statements have sent shockwaves across the opera industry given its insular, guarded, secretive, and punishingly intolerant nature. However, she's far from being the first person to denounce this trend. Already more than half a century ago, in The Great Singers, renowned American music critic Henry Pleasants condemned how the institutionalization of vocal training meant that, I quote, "the old-world intimacy of teacher and chosen pupil gave way to the impersonal machinery of the tuition-driven academy," end of quote, thereby turning art into an industry. The uncomfortable truth that is hidden from young American music students, their parents, and their sponsors is that the vast majority of American music schools work in a fashion akin to a Ponzi scheme. That is, in spite of never having enjoyed professional international careers as singers, second-rate musicians with the right academic credentials are hired, often with tenure, to train new generations of singers who hope to embark on international careers as opera singers. These young hopefuls, however, end up receiving only 1 hour of critically important practical instruction per week, while otherwise wasting critical years of their lives pursuing academic busywork, obtaining mediocre, often harmful training from their unskilled, inexperienced teachers, and end up burdened with debt which only a select few can get out of by rejoining academia, this time as teachers, and thereby perpetuating the vicious cycle. Notably, the tens, if not thousands of dollars of debt that young voice students accrue in pursuing a wild goose chase do not even benefit the often poorly paid teachers employed by these institutions. Instead, tuition and donations fund the self-serving, gargantuan administrative bureaucracies that run the American university and collegiate music schools and conservatories, with some administrators commanding seven-figure salaries, such as Juilliard's Damien Wetzel, who received $1,275,061 in 2024, according to tax filings published by ProPublica. The reality is that the mass production of singers by overpriced, ineffective, fraudulent American music schools is only a relatively recent phenomenon. This deceitful scheme is finally being publicly exposed. It is high time for to offer viable, time and cost-effective alternatives in order to restore and preserve the art of opera singing in the United States, lest the backlash against the institutional abuses and their proven inefficiency obliterate the genre in the US altogether. It's important to note that before the rise of American conservatories in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, operatic singing was considered an art handed down and not a skill standardized in classrooms. It was primarily taught through private apprenticeship systems, often described as master-disciple lineages. Historical evidence shows that this model was dominant for centuries, rooted in the traditions of Italian bel canto, and preserved by select artists who passed their craft to carefully chosen pupils. Between the 17th and 19th centuries, in cities like Naples, Rome, and Venice, young singers studied with established masters rather than in institutional settings. Teachers such as Niccolò Porpora, who lived between 1686 and 1768, and was one of the most celebrated bel canto pedagogues in history, trained singers like Farinelli, Caffarelli, and later even Joseph Haydn, the composer, as an accompanist, by means of one-on-one lessons and long apprenticeships. Instruction centered on oral transmission, imitation, and daily technical drills rather than formal curricula. Prior to the institutionalization of vocal instruction, great artists often accepted only a handful of protégés to whom they imparted their vocal secrets. The illustrious Manuel Garcia II, who lived between 1805 and 1906, for example, passed the bel canto tradition to students like Jenny Lind and Matilde Marchesi, preserving techniques that he learned from his father, Manuel Garcia I, the tenor who created roles in Mozart and Rossini operas. Students were typically chosen for perceived natural gifts, often recommended through networks of patronage. Teachers, and this is crucial, even often lived with or supported their pupils, creating an environment of total immersion. In the United States, formal conservatories did not appear until after the Civil War. The New England Conservatory, which was founded in 1867, and the Oberlin Conservatory, which was founded in 1865, were among the first conservatories. Their emergence marked a shift from selective private apprenticeship to a mass-produced, tuition-driven system designed to enroll large number of paying students. To be fair, before these institutions, prominent American singers like Lillian Nordica, Emma Eames, and later Rosa Poncel often traveled to Europe to study privately with established masters. This underscores the absence of a strong domestic institutional framework until the late 19th century, which would justify the appearance of the first conservatories. However, once conservatories took hold in the US, they professionalized and monetized the training process, packaging the art of singing into graded courses, diplomas, and tuition fees. What had been a selective transfer of artistry became a mass educational enterprise that could admit hundreds of students, the overwhelming majority of whom never ended up singing professionally. In fairness, many of the top American opera singers of recent decades did receive institutional training. However, with a few exceptions, all of them trained in the same handful of schools: Juilliard, Indiana University School of Music, Eastman School of Music, Music Academy of the West, and Philadelphia's Academy of Vocal Arts, which are some of the schools that really top the list. In New York City, Mannes and Manhattan School of Music, which are Juilliard's institutional competitors, have not produced as many household names in spite of collecting millions of dollars in tuition and donations. There is simply no return on investment to justify the support of these hundreds of inefficient, often fraudulent voice programs across the country. To add insult to injury, as of late, By all accounts, these institutions have shifted their emphasis from providing a solid music education to politically indoctrinating their students with leftist policies. Schools like Manhattan School of Music have been embroiled in very public displays of cancel culture based on preposterous accusations of cultural appropriation by disgruntled students against even the most progressive of teachers. It's because of all of the reasons that I stated above that I think that it is essential that we find new ways to continue with the teaching of opera, but on a very selective and limited basis. I think that there's absolutely no reason for there to be hundreds, if not thousands, of voice programs across the United States when the demand for singers simply does not meet the supply. The only people who are benefiting from this excess of supply are the universities and conservatories, and particularly the bureaucracies that run them, who depend on these hopeful young singers to survive. In reality, all that we need in this country are probably not even a dozen music schools. And I'm going to talk specifically about New York City. New York City has Juilliard, Manhattan School of Music, and Mannes. There are talks that Juilliard will supposedly become tuition-free starting in 2027. That remains to be seen, and if they get there, good for them. But right now, there are people who are paying up to $80,000 a year to study at Juilliard. And many of them are having to seek outside help. I know this because one of my former students was a Juilliard student who, during her undergrad time, studied with me for 2 years while she was getting zero scholarship at Juilliard. Then I improved her singing to such an extent that she got the best scholarship available at Juilliard. But then when they found out that she had been seeking outside help, even though they liked what they heard, they forbade her from studying with me. And I gather that this has to be primarily for political reasons because they don't like conservatives. This is shameful behavior. And I think that Juilliard should be ashamed of itself. But regardless, Juilliard remains the quote-unquote best school here in New York. But what about the other schools? Manhattan School of Music has not really produced that many great singers in the last years. Everybody knows that they are primarily now targeting Asian students who need to come to the United States to get diplomas, to get out of military service in Korea or in other countries. They're often accepting, and I know this for a fact, people who barely speak English, because I've interacted with such students. This is a ripoff. And some of these students may even be getting scholarships from American sponsors. Why should that be the case? I think this is absolutely preposterous. And about Mannes, I will not talk much because I don't know much about the school, because the school is also not producing that much to talk about. Let's be fair. I think that Academy of Vocal Arts in Philadelphia is the model that every other large city should follow. For those who are not familiar with it, Academy of Vocal Arts was founded over a century ago, or about a century ago. And it offers, and has offered from the very beginning, tuition-free instruction. The instruction that people get at AVA is daily and practical. And above all, is, as I said, tuition-free. On top of that, the students get stipends. What does this mean? That students actually have the ability and the peace of mind to concentrate on their studies for 4 years and to concentrate on what actually matters, which is how to learn to sing. Not do busy work about medieval troubadour music in France at the library, the way I had to do for my doctorate at Indiana University, with just one voice lesson a week. This is nonsense. We need to go and examine how the past worked and how the present at schools like AVA works and replicate this model. This is exactly why I set up the New York Vocal Arts Academy here, precisely because I knew that this is the only way to get people to not waste their time on bureaucracies that are just self-feeding and self-serving. I really urge people to stop throwing their money away, either by paying directly or through their parents, tuition to these institutions, particularly all the ones that are scattered all across the nation, and that typically do not graduate a single person who then goes on to a career, and to stop the bandwagon effect and falling for it, and who start thinking outside the box, because what is currently happening is truly objectionable, like Renee Fleming said. So I'm now going to allow my protege and current co-producer, for all practical purposes, of the show, since my producer Ian McMath had a very sensitive death in his family recently and hasn't been able to join us. I'm going to allow my student, Dylan Hughes, who's helping to produce this show today, to pose some very candid questions, and I'll do my very, very best to answer them in the most truthful and typically Emilio Pons direct way. So the question about the repertoire that should be assigned to students in these universities and conservatories is a very pertinent one, and it was the original question that was actually asked to Renee Fleming when she made these quote-unquote controversial statements. I think that the vast majority of people would like me to say that I think it's irresponsible to give big repertoire to young singers. I actually would say it goes both ways. I think it's irresponsible to treat with kiddy gloves young singers who may already be ready to sing bigger repertoire, as it is also irresponsible to assume that every single singer who's at an undergraduate program is going to be able to satisfy the requirements of a curricula that are completely generalized and that are not targeted to the individual. And how can you target it to an individual when you have hundreds of students? So I think that universities and colleges that accept canon fodder just to pay the tuition, who are unable to even sing a scale, are never going to be able to successfully present even as much as an art song recital, which, by the way, whoever thought that art song is easier than opera is an idiot. On the other hand, if you happen to have a phenomenally talented young singer who has been lucky or blessed, like Americans like to say, to have a wonderful instructor during his high school years, why should you then give them a cookie-cutter solution that is made for mediocre singers and force them to wait to develop their voices? I had once actually a conversation with the very knowledgeable Arnauld Alons about this. Arnauld Alons was one of the most sought-after casting directors in Europe for decades. And for many, many years before my friend Alex Fernandez took over casting at Teatro Municipal de Santiago in Chile, he used to be their casting advisor. And Arnauld was very adamant about not babying adults. And he always insisted, look at the careers of the great singers of the past. And I'm not talking about just the fact that the original Tristan und Isolde performers were 29 and 28 respectively. I'm not even talking about that, which is quite a remarkable thing to even fathom nowadays. I'm also talking about the fact that Maria Callas debuted at age 15, singing Santuzza, if I'm not mistaken. I'm talking about the fact that Virginia Zeani, in her early 20s, was already having huge international success across the world. And that by the time that she retired, she had sung over 600 performances of Violetta in La Traviata alone, plus hundreds of other performances. I'm talking about the fact that if you look at the careers of singers like Schwarzkopf, like Janowitz, like all the singers who had important careers in Europe, they were singing on a regular basis very distinct repertoire, like completely what would seem incompatible nowadays. So I think that telling a young singer that they have time, that they can take it easy and that they will develop eventually, blah, blah, is basically, for lack of a better term, a sin. I mean, it should be grounds for litigation, right? Because it's complete fraud. The reality is that the people who really go on to make big international careers, whether we like their singing or not, or whether they, maintain a good level of singing throughout their careers is another thing. But the reality is that the people who make big international careers already start doing national debuts in their early 20s, or winning big international competitions in their mid-20s. I'm talking about people like Eileen Perez, like Michael Fabiano, both of whom also trained at ABA, by the way. I'm talking about Costello. I'm talking about even Jamie Barton, who I personally dislike, but I can't deny that she had very big early successes, right? That's one of the voices that fell apart, by the way. I can't deny that these people started getting international attention very early on. So if you tell a young tenor that he needs to wait to be 28 or 29 to debut the way that I did, you're actually shortening their careers and pretty much guaranteeing that their chances of making it big are going to be slim, if not none. I mean, in my case, it really boiled down to the fact that I had to have institutional scholarships from outside the United States, from my home country of Mexico, to be able to afford tuition in the United States. And that I indeed fell for the big lie that you had to have a master's and then have a doctorate to go about doing things. Also, the fact that I'm not a US citizen, and that back then I only had a student visa. So the only way for me to keep studying in the United States was to prolong my studies. And the only way to prolong my studies was to do it academically through a master's and a doctorate. But if I had known that by the time that I got to Europe at age 29, it would be very late for a debut, I would have done things differently. Of course, hindsight is always 20/20. But again, a lot of people won't tell you just the truth. Now, I did get very lucky because even though I'm not like the most naturally gifted singer in the world, I am a polyglot, which is always very, very attractive for opera companies. I'm a very good musician because I used to be a pianist. My original degree was in piano. I'm smart and industrious. I'm also a former attorney at law, licensed to practice in Mexico. So, and I clearly have a master's and a doctorate, right, from Indiana University. So I was no idiot, and I was able to, in spite of the lateness, build a career for myself that lasted a good about 16 to 17 years, and that was international. But that was really an exception. The vast majority of people who by age 30 have not emerged already with a very, very solid career end up forever pursuing a wild goose chase. So I think I went off the original question a little bit, but I think I may have already preemptively answered another one of the questions. Well, I think that this is a very valid question, but this is a valid question for an attorney who has trained in the United States. I trained in Mexico. I'm trained outside this jurisdiction. However, I mean, I understand, obviously, legal principles in general, and I would suggest that whoever has this idea looks at the precedent that does exist in the lawsuit against Trump University. Because when it came to Trump, the president that I think is the best president of recent history, but I digress. Because people hate him, because people suffer from Trump derangement syndrome, they had absolutely no qualms about suing an educational institution on the grounds that it was fraudulent, on the grounds that the promises that were made to students were exaggerated, on the grounds that they were being improperly trained, etc., etc. I think that there are many similarities to that case that actually did go through. And I think that this absolutely applies to any number of schools where I've seen young American singers not even be able to sing a major third chromatically, like was your case, for example, when I met you. So I have a very direct and, for American sensibilities, crass even temperament. But the good thing about me is that I always say what I mean and mean what I say, although I'm also dyslexic, and so sometimes I mean what I say, and what I say is mean. So I think that we need to bear in mind what Peter Boghossian, the American philosopher, mentioned once in a lecture that I attended recently. I have the fortune of knowing him personally now. He said that we need to find the distinction between being nice and being kind. So a lot of people think that being nice is telling people what they want to hear or comforting lies. But is this really a good thing to do for people? I believe it's not. I believe that the kind thing to do is to tell them the truth. Now, because I'm not a particularly kind person, I deliver the truth in an unkind way sometimes. But that's, again, just a function not of my morality, but of my personality. I think that my morality is on the right track. I think that it's important to tell people the truth. Because otherwise, you get people who are completely delusional about what they can and cannot do, who spend their entire lives pursuing a wild goose chase. And this shouldn't be. Nobody should allow anybody to do that. It's cruel. I had, for example, a student who came to me with a wobble the size of the former Soviet Union, right? I mean, you could drive a truck through that wobble. Whoa, whoa, whoa. I was like, what are you doing? Like, you're not an opera singer. You cannot sing like this. Nobody wants to hear this, etc., etc. And we worked diligently for over a year with very, high attention to detail, painstakingly looking at every little interval and trying to get her to correct this horrendous vocal fault that is very widespread, I must say, in the United States. And after a while, she decided, I'm not happy. I just want to be able to sing. And Emilio is too rude, too mean. He just is too exacting. He wants a very good sound all the time. Fine, more power to you. Fast forward 2 minutes, and she's singing big roles in some garage companies that, feed her ego. Luckily, she doesn't live off of these. Luckily, she has an actual job. I won't say more details because then you would find out who she is, and it's not my intention to embarrass her. But it is my intention to illustrate the point that there are plenty of delusional people out there who will continue for the rest of their lives pursuing a wild goose chase because nobody told them, A, you're not doing these things correctly, or B, they knew that they weren't doing it, but they milked them for their money's worth. Well, no, I'm less selective for two reasons. First of all, I need to pay the bills, right? I'll tell you the difference. I'll tell you the difference, and it's a very valid question. Not everybody who takes private lessons because they believe that they are going to have a great international career. There are people who simply see voice development as a path towards personal development and personal satisfaction. And this is a very valid thing to be able to do. Not every person that takes tennis lessons or even yoga lessons aims to become a professional at them. I mean, like my aunt, who's 70-something, took tennis lessons at her club in Evansville, Indiana for decades. Was she being milked in the same way? No. Was she being lied to? No. Nobody was telling her that she was going to go to Wimbledon. Nobody was selling her a diploma to go and sing and play tennis at Wimbledon, right? She was just pursuing a hobby of hers that she wanted to get better at. And I think that there's absolutely nothing wrong with private voice instruction that is akin to what I just described. In fact, one of my actually best students, who now happens to sing better than many professionals out there, is my student Andrea Reichenbach. Andrea has, and I name her because I'm actually now going to praise her. Andrea came to me broken by other teachers with many issues. Then she was super modest, humble, and above all dedicated to honing her voice and her craft. Now she's singing truly better than ever, but she does it not because she thinks, or certainly not because I've told her that she's going to sing at La Scala or at the Met anytime soon. She does it because she derives pleasure out of it. Should I be prevented from providing this guidance and this pleasure to people who actually want to do it better? No. Now, would I prefer to only be able to teach young, truly talented singers primarily, and only a few of Andrea Reichenbachs out there? Of course I would. That would be ideal for me. And this is, again, why I started the initiative of the New York Vocal Arts Academy. My aim now is to get enough funding to finally launch a year-long program where 4 students get daily training, not just with me, but also with people that I trust, like my very good, 20-year-long friend Mathieu Cognier, who's a French coach and a phenomenal pianist, who works at Curtis and at Juilliard and has also worked at Manhattan, and other people who I trust here in New York City, right? But the reality is that I cannot come up with a proof of concept by engaging in daily, non-stop charity, because I'm not fabulously wealthy. You know, if I were, I would. But since I am, I'm not. But I know that there are many people out there who are in a position to help. And I urge those of you who agree with my view and my position to do so. I have a 501c3 established precisely to this end. And I guarantee you that every dollar that goes to it will not go towards any woke nonsense or to any administration or anything other than just teaching people how to sing, or how to correctly pronounce German, Italian, French, Russian, whatever, how to correctly sing in different styles, etc. So now, are there charlatans out there? Yes, but those are, and I mean private charlatans out there. And those are the ones who I've seen teach either online or privately and publicly here in New York, where, you know, the student is singing at a level that would be unacceptable as extra chorus in Annaberg Buchholz, the tiniest theater in Germany, and they're telling them, yes, you go, like, you know, you're great, and if you believe this, this is going to happen. It's like, yeah, right. If I believe it, I'm going to win the lottery, and if I believe it, I'm going to wake up tomorrow being 6'3". Of course, this is not how the world works. There are certain people that simply don't have the skill sets for this profession, And there are many people who maybe have a good voice, but like my friend Ed Back says, voice by God, brain by Mattel, right? They have very good instruments, but no musicianship, no musicality, no ability to learn languages, etc., because the IQ is just not there. Or they have those two things, but they have no personality. And I think that if a teacher sees all these deficiencies and still tells these people, you are going to be the next best thing since Maria Callas, these people ought to be ashamed of themselves. So the question about casting and what is currently happening with it is one that I think is of uttermost importance. And it starts at the collegiate level, but it continues at a professional level. And I think that what is currently happening is a disaster. And people should be ashamed of themselves for pushing woke collectivist casting nonsense. The fact that somebody is black, gay, Muslim, obese, gender fluid, whatever of these categories that the left loves to enshrine as sacred, has absolutely nothing to do with a person's ability to sing or their suitability for a career on stage. The people that support these theories always do so in order to virtue signal about how wonderful, empathetic, good persons they are, but they always forget that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And that means in this particular context is that every opportunity that we give to an undeserving minority just to check a box is an opportunity that we have taken away from somebody who may be or may not be from that minority, or who may be from the quote-unquote oppressive majority of white, cisgendered, heterosexual, Christian, conservative men in this country. I think this is absolute nonsense that belongs in the garbage of 2020, in the garbage can of 2020. I think that the only reasonable, fair criteria to cast is to start with, can this person sing? Period. Is this person up to task? And this should also be applied, by the way, to conservatory and college admission processes. These should be done completely blindly, specifically on the basis of ability to sing. Now, once we've established, okay, singers A, B, C, D, and E are all able to sing at more or less the same level, all things being equal, now I have to start looking at who is more suitable to one particular role than another. So, all things being equal, I'm sorry to break it to you girls, but I've had many conversations with casting directors in Europe who, by the way, run the actual industry, because the industry is completely collapsed in the United States. And the only way to have a successful career is to have, at first, at least a good European career, and then maybe come back to the States to the few good operating theaters. The only way to do that is to actually be able to not just sing, but also look the part. Nobody is going to give Violeta to the same 350-pound monstrosities that sing it here. It's just not going to happen. And so for people to insist on being all, virtue signaling woke tarts about like, oh, but, body positivity and you're great and healthy at every weight, it's completely irresponsible. It's a lie. It's a fraudulent lie, right? I literally had this conversation with many of the casting directors that I've talked to. And let's be honest, opera is not just a musical genre, it's also a visual genre. It's theater. This is the reason why, for example, in Germany, which is the largest market in the world, opera is called Musiktheater, and it's actually studied as part of a genre of theater history, not necessarily of music history, right? And if we really are honest, when we look at Hollywood, or actually even look at Broadway, right? Which is one of the things that I really don't understand about this country, is that these considerations are taken absolutely into account. When there was that big remake of Romeo and Juliet, they chose Claire Danes and Leonardo DiCaprio. They didn't do it with Tom Arnold and Roseanne Barr, because nobody would have gone to watch that. And for the same, by the same token, for the same reasons, when you go to Broadway, you go see Merrily We Go Around with, what is his name, Jonathan or Jason Groff, something like this, who happens to be a very handsome guy, who's also highly talented, and who sings moderately well. But he's a great performer, great actor, great dancer, great everything. So all things considered, was there probably somebody vying for the same role as he was in Broadway that was more overweight, less attractive? For sure. But the guy who, in addition to be able to sing, was able to act and look the part will end up doing the job. And that's just the reality. Now, if you add on top of that all these other considerations and mix them in the equation, the result is what the Metropolitan Opera has become. A shade of its old self, a parody of opera, where people are singing there because of the color of their skin, because of how sad their sob story of their past is, but not because they can sing well. I don't want to be particularly nasty, but there's one baritone there that has the weirdest reverse wobble I've ever heard, and sings probably in Urdu or I don't know what language, whether he sings in Russian or French or whatever other language I've supposedly heard him sing in, and who sings out of tune. All these things should be completely beyond the level of what is even fathomable at an opera house, let alone the premier opera house of the world of yore, which is the Met, and which no longer is. So what would I do if I were, for example, either a casting director or even better, artistic director or general manager of a house? I would say, first of all, we stop once and for all with all this woke nonsense. We take the collectivist left entirely out of the game. And we start looking once again at the individual. Is the individual capable? Yes. Is the individual of any particular race that seems supposedly to be marginalized? Yes. Fine. We let them sing anyway, because that's actually what non-discrimination is about. Non-discrimination is about not preventing worthy individuals from prospering, but not about preventing worthy individuals from prospering in order to give unworthy individuals or undeserving individuals chances that they did not earn. So that's the first thing that I would do. Another thing that I would absolutely overhaul is the way that educational institutions work, particularly when it comes to their collaboration agreements with opera houses. I think that any institution that doesn't have a collaboration agreement with an opera house should disappear, period. But that said, any institution, or that doesn't at least have their own opera house, for example, Rice University, I think actually they have both things, because they do have a collaboration agreement, as far as I know or understand, with Houston Grand Opera, which is a great thing. But on top of that, they have a very good faculty, a very select number of students, and a brand new state-of-the-art theater. So I have nothing against institutions like Rice. I have something against institutions like whatever college conservatory of Mississippi, right? That have absolutely no business teaching this, and certainly not selling snake oil to people. I think that academic institutions should have these cooperation agreements, but at the same time, I think that the young artist programs should be run completely differently. What currently happens is that young artist programs in the United States are nothing other than glorified postgraduate apprenticeships, and they are nothing other than cheap slave labor or ways for patrons of the opera houses in question to feel good about themselves or to feel that they're making a difference. This is nonsense. I mean, you learn absolutely nothing about the reality of singing opera by singing fragments of Cenerentola for underage children or for kindergartners between 8 and 10 a.m. I mean, I guess there is a good educational element about it. I'd prefer that kindergartners are exposed to opera rather than to rap and hip hop. But that's besides the point. That's not what the select few that make it into a young artist program should be doing. I think that it is high time to reform these young artist programs to give better, to be more selective in the process, obviously, but also to give better and greater chances to the individuals in those programs, and to stop pretending that you're going to be able to graduate from the program of whatever opera house having sung only third tree from the left to actually having a career. I think it's also high time that we say this. Any role that you have not sung with a professional opera company is not a role that you will be considered for a jump-in or as an invitation in a professional opera house by someone who actually needs someone who has proven themselves already in this role. So, yes, I won't deny that the experience that I got at Indiana University, that has a phenomenal opera theater, performing several roles, wasn't valuable. Of course, that experience is valuable, but for practical purposes, on my resume, nothing started counting truly for my professional resume until I actually started singing professionally. And only those roles were those that actually counted. So I think that it's also important that these institutions, particularly young artist programs and the universities, are called out for the lies that they tell their students and their sponsors. The final thing that I'm going to say, and this was not a question that was posed by Dylan, but this is the final thing that I'm going to say, is that I think it is absolutely a disgrace that the premier arts institution of the capital of the United States of America, which is still the mightiest country in the world, is in such utter state of disrepair, for lack of a better word. If you look at the statistics, even run an AI search of the best 20 opera houses in the world, Washington National Opera is nowhere to be found. The first 10 opera houses are for sure La Scala, Vienna State Opera, Bayerische Staatsoper, Opéra National de Paris, the Met, Covent Garden, obviously, Teatro Real de Madrid, a few other institutions of very, very high caliber that constantly deliver very good results. Then in the next list, in the next 10, you have plenty of theaters in Germany, like Hamburg, Berlin, obviously, depending on which one, but Staatsoper definitely belongs in the first 10, but you have also Deutsche Oper Berlin, you have Deutsche Oper am Rhein, you have other houses here in the United States, like Chicago and San Francisco, which is about the end of the United States in terms of huge, high international quality. And Washington National is not there. Why? Because the agenda is woke, the production value is simply not there, the number of performances is simply not there, and the quality of the performers is also not even. Every now and then they have good singers, but mostly they don't. So I think that this administration, the Trump administration, would be wise to change the paradigm entirely, and along with restructuring Kennedy Center and funding it very handsomely, the way President Trump has done, they should either completely get rid of the board of WNO and of all the artistic leadership and start over, or do their own productions and show to the world that America knows how to do great opera too. And very importantly, I think that Washington National should create an ensemble of American opera singers, of premier opera singers, so that the very, very best young talent out there in this country can get a strong footing in the industry before they can actually start singing internationally. Because I think that the greatest hurdle amongst many, but the greatest hurdle that American singers face, and I know this because I led the Sangora International Music Festival and Academy for 8 years in Germany, and I had, as I said, the opportunity to organize more than 600 auditions with some of the best casting directors of the world, is that they come to Europe with very little on-stage experience. And the stage experience that they come with is typically from like New Jersey opera of the whatever, or Wichita Falls pocket opera, blah, blah, blah. I mean, this nobody takes seriously. And the reality is that for a European casting director to see, Chicago Lyric, the Met, or San Francisco on the resume of an American singer is extremely unlikely, because we all know that those singers need to have had already a lot of mileage gained abroad to be able to sing in these three main American theaters. Houston maybe 4, right? So I think that it is essential that any new administration of WNO should completely restructure everything to also include an ensemble for young American singers who are on a regular basis rotating with international singers. So they can be like the B cast, whereas the international singers are A, and then you have a mixture of A and B depending on what night you're doing, so that they get also to learn from their colleagues, but also above all from the experience of actually being on stage, singing main and supporting roles and not comprimario roles. Comprimario roles are absolutely pointless. And to, on top of that, have the ability to have financial security at the beginning of their careers, because there's nothing greater for a young singer than to have the peace of mind that their monthly expenses and their monthly income is guaranteed. This is what I had when I started in Germany. Germany has many defects, and of course one of them is that the system can be very abusive, and that the monthly salaries that we get when we start are very, very low. So I will eventually also talk about what happens in my other country, which is Germany. But the fact that I was, for example, at the very, very beginning of my career after Russia, after debuting at Mariinsky Theater as a young artist, the very first experience, very first was Freiburg in Barbara Seville. But after that, I had a fest contract in Heidelberg for 2.5 years. And I was their only lyric tenor. And the season was tailored around me. And the theater was tiny. It was probably 800 seats. So I got to sing 7 leading roles per season. Ask any well-known American tenor how long it took them to get to that point. It's just not possible within the United States. And so after 2.5 years, I had enough repertoire for people and enough reviews and enough experience for people to trust me with new roles, or to call me back for other roles that I had done before. And this is how then I went to Geneva for 2 years, and from then on I started freelancing, until I little by little grew disenchanted with the profession, and I also started teaching in Germany, and eventually found another path before things then also hit the brakes with the pandemic, and at which point I simply decided I didn't want to be part of this. But at least not actively on stage. But I think that this is a very, very important aspect that nobody has dared to talk about and to change. just like they're not willing to talk about how awful these woke nonsense has been for opera. They're not willing to talk about how even a good idea as the broadcasts of the Met productions have actually cannibalized their own audiences, etc., etc. There's so much fear, so much cowardice in this business that only allows the status quo to continue. And I think it's high time to call it out. And I would just add, since we started this whole conversation based on the fact that Renee Fleming talked about it, that it's sad that it takes a star like Renee Fleming to talk about it for finally for people to grow a pair and take off the gloves and start talking about this topic. But also, I think it's very sad, to be gracious, that Renee Fleming waited until her own career had basically faded and to the point where she's a multimillionaire to finally have the moral fortitude to talk about these issues. So I would strongly suggest that people stop shooting the messenger. I know that I am a messenger that has a delivery that is not very savory for a lot of Americans and some Europeans. The Russians absolutely get me. The Germans get me teilweise. But I think that it's better to hear an uncomfortable truth than a comforting lie. And with that, I will end this episode of American Reconquista. Thank you for joining me. If you liked my video, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, like the video, and leave a comment. Thank you.